So the next stage in the process generally is creating a surface and then editing that surface and creating contours. So all this is dealt with in the Surfaces tab, and as with most of these tabbed workflows, we're generally moving from the left towards the right. So the first thing that we'd do is select the entities that we want to go into the surface. The feature code library is already pre-programmed that any features that need to go into the surface are marked as such, and any features that don't go into the surface are marked as such. So we can go in here and we can look at the feature code library under the Project Explorer. So we just dig into the feature code library, and if we look at some of our feature codes, our lines we'll look at. So for instance, bottom of bank, if I double click that on the right hand side, we can see that that is to be included in the surface. Whereas if I look at something like a canopy line, then I can see that that's not to be included in the surface. So therefore, if I select all entities and add them to the surface, it will automatically ignore any features that are marked as not to be included in the surface. So I can just select everything. I can go to create surface, and then I can name my surface. I'll call it DTM. We'll have another video that covers the surface classification and the survey dates that will dig into these things a little bit deeper, but they're generally more on a civils workflow. So if I select everything, it tells me that there's going to be 182 features that are not included in the surface because of what the feature coding is doing. So if I create my surface, we can see the triangles. I can jump to my 3D view and I can move around, and I can see that all these entities here, which are actually surveyed on the face of a building, they're elevation surveyed points, they are ignored because the feature code library specifically says for them to be ignored. So we can review the surface. Generally, there'll always be triangles formed that won't quite be formed the way we want them to. We can use lots of the commands in the Surfaces tab. So one of them might be to manually add a break line. So I can just select break line and manually draw a break line in, and the triangle edges will honor that break line. I can also choose swap triangles. I can just click on any surface triangle, and it will basically flip the triangle around. So as long as there's an alternative. So we can flip these triangles if we want to. I'm not saying that these are legitimate edits here. I think they were probably okay the way they were, but we can flip the triangles using surface or swap surface triangles. One that I would use more often is the trim surface edge command. So these triangles that are basically formed around an area that hasn't really been surveyed, we can just trim them out by clicking once inside and once outside, and we can basically take them right out. This one here, this is a point that I really just want to remove from the surface, and we'll cover that in a second. So these triangles we can just crop out and remove them from being formed. So the trim surface edge is one that we can use. What it won't allow you to do is leave something, so we can't use it for this because it won't allow something come out of the surface, and you will have some issues. For instance, here, if I try and do that, it won't do it because it's the only connection to this point here, so it won't allow me to manually remove these surfaces. But these things here can be removed pretty quickly from the DTM. We'll just close that. So something like this is something that we just didn't want. It shouldn't really be included in the surface at all. So we can just select the feature itself, and we can just go to surface members, and we can just choose remove, and that is edited out of the surface. Now you'll notice here that because I've edited something on the very edge of the triangle, it will remove the edge of the DTM, it will remove some of the edits that we've already done. So a general principle in TBC is that if we want to remove things from the DTM, we address those things first if they're around the edge. it's okay if they're in the middle, but if they're round the edge, we want to remove anything that shouldn't be in the DTM first, and then we can trim our triangles. Maybe that will be changed in a future release, but that's the situation as of release 5.2. So these are other features here. So we can review the DTM in 3D, and we can inspect, see whether the DTM looks like it's formed. Generally, it looks like it's formed okay, but there's certainly some building points here that were surveyed on the face of the building that certainly shouldn't be included in the DTM. So we can just go into surface members here again, and we can just choose to remove these triangles or remove these features from the DTM, so the triangles automatically update. So we can edit in 2D, we can edit in the 3D. It's a very powerful feature within TBC. So we're just going to quickly skip around here, make sure that there's nothing else that should be in the DTM. So a few points in the building here once again. Oh, that should be removed. Like you can see here, you can add things into the DTM if you wanted to as well. So we're just quickly removing these features from the DTM that shouldn't be in there. So we can skip around. We can see here, for instance, the curbs forming correctly. Everything looks pretty good. We can also review, when we're reviewing the data, you can see in the bottom left-hand corner of the screen here, vertical exaggeration. So when we've got a very flat terrain as we do here, having a little bit more vertical exaggeration can be very useful. So the shortcut to this is hold Control-Shift on your keyboard, wheel with your mouse button, and you can see the bottom left-hand corner here. It's now gone up to a vertical exaggeration of 3, and it allows me to see what's going on much more clearly. So I can see whether there's any specific issues. So it's a very useful, it's a feature I use all the time, the vertical exaggeration. So it's actually highlighted that this point here possibly should actually be removed from the DTM. But overall, that looks pretty good. If I wanted to add an entire line into the DTM or out of the DTM, then I can select the line and just choose the add or remove from the surface, add remove surface members. Another way to review the data that I use a lot is the surface slicer view. So I can just go into surface slicer view. It opens up in the bottom, or you can push it over to the right. And I can basically click once, and then it does a dynamic slice through the DTM. So you can see I already have a DTM formed here. So we've got 2 DTMs, and I can slice, and it's dynamically updating as I move my second click. If I actually make that second click, then it freezes and it allows me to zoom in. And for instance, if I zoom in far enough, it will actually show me the actual grades in the DTM. So the grey one is the one that I've just formed. There are some under surfaces we can toggle off these ones. So the one called OGL was one that I'd already formed, so we can toggle that off. And another command I use quite often, if we just close the surface slicer view, is this coordinate toolbar, which can be turned on here. And it just updates your surface elevation anywhere where you go across that DTM, so you can get a quick idea any heights and as the heights are changing. So that's the coordinate toolbar. So at this stage, we might want to just go back and quickly trim some of these surface edges. So if I just trim those back now, that looks like it's pretty good. So now if I want to freeze my edge of the DTM, we don't want to have to do that again. We can go back in here and we can say create an edge break line, and I can put it in any layer. I need to name it, so I'll just call it bound, and then we can just, that gives us this edge. So whenever we form the DTM again, it stops it going outside that edge So if I needed to remove something from the DTM, then we can restrict it back into that edge without having to redo these edits. The other thing it allows us to do, now boundaries are very powerful. We can cover those in more detail in some of the civils videos that are being done. But generally, we don't want a DTM to form inside that building. So essentially, this edge break line is one boundary, and this, we have a closed line inside this building. So if I want to restrict the DTM from forming there, I just go to surface boundaries, and I need to select two boundaries. And as I said before, there'll be another video that covers boundaries in more detail. But if I select these two boundaries and choose to add them to the DTM, then the boundary on the outside is the extents of the DTM, and then it basically uses a cookie cutter rule that any boundaries inside that are fully enclosed within the outer boundary and are not touching it, then it will basically take a cut out of the DTM. And obviously we can have multiple buildings across our site, and as long as they're fully closed and they're not touching any other boundary, then we'll basically just cut out these areas from the DTM.